Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 15th, 2024 Radnor Township School District Policy Committee meeting. With us tonight, we have our administrative liaison and our solicitor, as well as our teacher and student representatives and the full committee. So with that, we will get underway with administrative remarks. Dr. Hand?
No administrative remarks this evening.
Great. Moving right along. This is the opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to come forward and give public comment, now would be the time. Please come forward. And if you would, when you get yourself seated, there's a little button on there. You can turn on the microphone.
Okay.
And would you please state your name and the town in which you live, and be aware that per Board Policy 006, you have 4 minutes to provide public comment.
That's what I understand.
Thank you so much.
I think I only made 5 of these. You have one. People maybe share.
Sir, you are welcome to give that to us after the meeting if you'd like to sit and give us public comment so we can give our full attention to what you'd want to say.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. There's a small button on that microphone. Yes, go ahead. Just a moment. I'm not sure that light came on, so if you would give it another press. Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Lambert. I live in Wayne, Ravenscliffe, and Radnor. And I'm here to talk about 2 things, really, but they're related. My motivation for coming here is that the board sets policies, and I think a policy was not followed. And it's why we have a tennis celebration meeting on Election Day. There was a scheduling conflict, and in less than 2 weeks ago, they put out a new announcement to actually have it on Election Day. I also have 2 policy revisions that are related and motivated to this that I will come to in a minute. But first, just a little background on this. I complained. They said, we agree with you completely, but, this was the only date this venue could move us from the 7th, the original date, conflict with the National Honor Society. That should have been caught. These things are part of the policy to be worked out with a meeting and a notice, and it didn't happen. And as a result, they moved it. There were only 2 dates available at Overbrook, the 5th and the 20-something, Thanksgiving week. Why didn't enter their minds that maybe they look at another venue then? I don't know. But Election Day was the date. I look at this as one of the most significant elections of our time, maybe our lifetimes. The issues affecting women are incredible. They're front and center. A woman is running for president. Our female students in particular.
Sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. This is an opportunity to provide public comment on our policy, if you would like to do that.
Fine. I just want to say that given the significance, it's all the more important the policy be followed. Here are the policies. The current policy is a booster club planning a recognition event or a banquet shall notify its district, coach, activities, et cetera, to avoid and or minimize scheduling conflicts. That didn't happen. So I have a problem with that. That didn't happen. The suggested revision is very similar, except for it says it will check the calendar for potential schedule conflicts, and if there are none, put the activity on the calendar. Under no circumstances will it schedule an event on days when school is not open or virtual, nor on general election days. That's my proposed change to the policy. Further, there's one that talks about having meetings, to talk about informational at the beginning of each school year. I modified that, and the language is a little bit longer there, and I don't know if I want to spend the time doing that, where it talks about coaches and students, et cetera, will all be notified of these changes. It's season instead of beginning of the year, because if you get further along, people forget, they do whatever. Make it for the season not right at the beginning of the year. Check the calendar again. If there are no conflicts, make sure it is registered and that this is it. We're doing this, and we're doing this on these dates. Those are my two proposed suggestions to the policy. They're in writing, and, you know, I can hand those out to you. I'm almost done my 4 minutes.
Thank you so much for your comment. Do we have any other public comment? Okay, so only because there is no other public comment, I will just give you the courtesy to ask you to reach out to our administrative liaison with your policy recommendations. At a time when we are reviewing the relevant policies, he'll have that information in hand for the board to consider. The way the process for policy revisions works is that we have a cycle, and when a particular policy is brought forth to us for any number of reasons, it could be brought forth to us. The administration reviews any proposed changes in law, state law, federal law, what have you, or other recommendations that come to them through a variety of sources, the administration, public comment, what have you. And when the administration has recommended changes to us for a particular policy, they incorporate those changes into the policy, the committee reviews it, and then we bring it to the board for approval. So,
Susan, may I ask you a question? I didn't fully understand what you're saying. Is this going to then go into a process, or does it require something to trigger it?
nothing's required other than if you would share that information with our administrative liaison, Dr. Hand, so that he'll have your proposed changes on hand when that policy is reviewed.
Okay. Second question, it has also related. What I'm citing here, I'm mentioning here, and admittedly I talked about why I'm particularly sensitive about this issue, and thank you for getting me, is if a policy seems to have not been followed, and it has an immediate ramification, which this does, because they're talking about November 5th, is there any action that can be taken to say, hey, you shouldn't do this. There are other alternatives. You shouldn't do this.
Mr. Lemon, I'm going to ask you to follow up with the administration, only to kind of set the tone and expectation of how a committee meeting typically functions. When someone brings forth public comment, the comment is taken in by the board, and we often have our administration follow up. As a courtesy to you, I'm happy to follow up with you offline, but a back and forth during our committee meeting is not typically the way our committee would function.
And I apologize. I don't
No apology
understand. I've
necessary.
never done this one before.
No apologies necessary. Just wanted to explain the process to you. So we're going to continue
When
with
do
our
I come
agenda
to you?
and follow up afterward.
I'll be here, or I can share my contact.
Okay. Do you want me to hand this to you now so you can see it?
Mr. Lambert, would you mind turning off that microphone, please? Thank you so
Sure.
much. Actually, Mr. Lambert, if you maybe would take that over to the side, you could give it to Mrs. Klusman, or over to the side, because we're going to continue with our agenda now. Thank you very much. We have no other public comment? Great. Okay, thank you. So with that, we're going to move into our next item, which is a review of the September 10th Policy Committee meeting minutes. Did we have any feedback or comment for the meeting minutes? Great, so we will mark those as approved. And then we'll move into our first agenda item, which is Policy 339, uncompensated leave. This is a policy that's up for a second read and adoption. Dr. Hand?
Great, so this is one of our 3 policies for second read. This policy comes to us from Title IX updates and references uncompensated leave as a potential disability for employers and elected public officials.
Do we have any further comment? We saw this last month as a first read. Okay, so we will, with the consent of the committee, we will see this on the agenda for a second read and adoption. Great, thank you so much. We're going to move into the next agenda item, Policy 803, School Calendar. This policy is also up for a second read and adoption. Dr. Hand?
So the changes to the school calendar are based on Act 56 of 2023, which adjusted the school requirements for students to either attend 180 days or 990 hours for high school, 900 hours for elementary, basically adding the "or" in there that we have a choice as districts.
And again, do we have any comments from the committee? And my apologies, from the teacher rep or Connie? No? Okay, great. So then, with the approval of the committee, we will also expect to see this on the October business meeting agenda for a second read and adoption. And we will move right into the next agenda item, which is policy 4805.1, a memorandum of understanding with law enforcement. This is a new policy for us, but it is also up for a second read and adoption. Dr. Hand?
Thank you. So this policy is new, and this one was based on Act 33 of 2024, basically codifying what we already do with the Memorandum of Understanding with law enforcement for school safety and security. So this information also references our policies in 805 and 805.1 as well.
Do we have any comments? Yes, go ahead.
I'm not looking to change anything in this policy, just for informational purposes, if there are any parents out there watching. I'm under the assumption that the reporting of this pertains to records that a student would have, and it would show, and it would appear if applying to college or applying for a job. Is that correct?
So if we're looking at, and we might see some other policies in first read which might relate as well as those policies come out of Act 33 dealing with weapons, terroristic threats. So if there is an incident with a student, that does become part of their record. So that becomes part of their record, but also some of the reporting requirements are specifically for the state and for the federal government, which report on the number of incidents and whatever action that follows that, whether it's a suspension, detention, expulsion.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, so with the consent of the committee, we will expect to see this policy on the agenda for a second read and adoption. Thank you. We're going to move right into our next policy agenda item, which is agenda item 4.04, policy 200, enrollment in district. And this policy is up for a first read. Dr. Hand?
Thank you. So you might notice this policy was before us not all that long ago in 2023. So what brings this policy back to the committee tonight is yet another act from the state, is Act 67. So Act 67 of 2024 basically redefines some parameters, which we were already following, for disenrollment in schools. So what we did is we took a look at policy 200 and the accompanying policies of 201 and 202. Policies 201 and 202 did not need any change. There were only minor changes needed to policy 200, and what you might see is an administrative regulation that we attach to this from policy 202. So policy 200 is before us tonight, but I did also attach to board docs the AR for 202. There were no changes to 202, so I figured it was good to attach that one here so that we can see what we did. So the changes were only slight that we had to policy 200. Basically, we added in some definitions for parent and guardian. We did reorganize some of the subsections in there according to our Radnor format, and we added references to military enrollment of military children, which is policy 254, which this committee saw at the end of last school year, which was a new policy. And we did add a reference to eligibility for non-resident students, referencing back to policy 202, and again, have that preview of the administrative regulation as well for an AR 202.
Do we have any questions? Yes. Janie, go ahead.
This is not urgent for this cycle, but maybe something to consider for the next cycle is, should we merge 205 with this policy, the military enrollment policy, so that it's all in the same place? Just something to consider, because I think maybe people wouldn't think they would have to look in two different places. And I know we reference it here, but maybe it just makes sense to combine them.
Did you mean 254 or 205? Because the policy in 200, it says,
254, right?
Will it-
is military children.
Yes,
Okay.
254, sorry.
okay, great.
I think we certainly could look at that. I mean, Mr. Barbetta and I can go back and look at that, but that, I believe the language that asked us to create 254 actually said there will be a policy for military children. And does that mean it has to be its own standalone policy? I think we can go back and look at the legal language there.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? I just wanted to follow up a question that we asked when we were discussing the agenda, was the question around the age of the student. I'm just trying to find where it was listed. School age, under the definition of school age students. So it states that a school age shall be defined as the period from the earliest admission age for the district's kindergarten program. I actually thought that there was an admission age by law, but maybe that's the age that you have to make sure you enroll them. Till graduation from high school or the end of the school term in which a student reaches the age of 21, whichever occurs first. So the question that came up around that law of being 22, if you're a special education student, where did the administration land on that information?
So when we were looking at policy, and what Mrs. Stern is referencing is the PA state law, the school code is for regular ed students through the age of 21, by the time they reach their 21st birthday, that we educate a student. For special education, it's slightly different, and the law has actually gone back and forth a little bit on this, and there has been some contention within the state. Taking a look at IDEA and what that actually requires is our interpretation, and most of the state's interpretation as well, though there is a stay on the current order right now, and it'll be elevated to, I believe, the Third Circuit, is that we educate special education students through their 22nd birthday, but those are very specific circumstances. So the hold on it right now is still under the old interpretation of 21, but we as Radnor Township School District do educate our special education students, should they need that, through their 22nd birthday. So this policy refers to all students, and what's written specifically in school code is the age of 21 because it refers to regular education students. If we wanted to have a separate carve-out that references educating special education students through the age of 22, we certainly could, but the line as it exists now references all students, including regular education.
So we have regular education students who can attend our high school until 21 years old?
They could. If
I'm
a
looking at
student
our
was held
solicitor.
back in
We
a
have-
grade, you could
Okay.
see students getting into upper ages
Okay,
or other extenuating circumstances.
all right. Well, the only other question, so that's accurate. I mean, I don't doubt Dr. Hand, I'm just asking our solicitor because he's here.
That's accurate, and the initial question you asked about the initial age for enrollment, I believe it's 6.
It is.
But if you have a kindergarten program, generally speaking, those students are going to be admitted earlier than the age of 6, and
Yes.
that's why we reference the kindergarten
Thank you.
rather than 6.
Appreciate that.
So, but to answer your question, yes, up to
Great.
21.
I have one other question. Don't turn off your mic, because I asked this question when we discussed it as well. The definition, an emancipated minor shall mean a person under 21 years of age. When a child turns 18, they are not a minor. So why are we calling them an emancipated minor up to the age of 21? They might still be a student. They might actually still be under the purview of their parents while they're registered in school, but they are not minors.
So my understanding is that definition is taken directly from school code.
Okay, thank you,
And that's where it comes from.
thank you. All right.
I just have some minor wordsmithing things here. So, just under the McKinney-Vento Act compliance, just to kind of keep with the kind of uniform phraseology there, it says enroll identified homeless students, so just students experiencing homelessness maybe. Yeah, again, this is minor stuff. And then I believe on, it's like,
We do say experiencing homelessness. That's the proposed change in the policy. Is
No.
that what you were saying?
yeah, no,
Oh,
it's,
okay.
it's phrased that way in other parts of the document. It just wasn't there. That's all
Got
I'm
it.
saying, yeah. And then, I have PDF page, 3. It just says, second paragraph, it says, the district also reserves the right to charge the parent/guardian. And then in red, it said, non-struck out red, it says parent or legal guardian will be charged. Just, that needs to be,
Could you point out where you're seeing that? Page 3, I don't,
It's on the AR.
sorry.
you're talking about in the AR.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, great.
I thought we had moved on to the AR, because it
Well,
was
we're not going to
mentioned
review
earlier.
the AR.
Oh, okay.
Particularly, but if you want to follow up with Dr. Hand about those, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
Directly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
All righty, so,
Mrs. Stern, I will add, though, in reviewing this, back to policy 202, under an emancipated minor in the definition, we might make one small change. Shall mean rather than person, we'll say student. In working with our on-site counsel, that's something that we had discussed today. That might make that more clear, and then certainly Mr. Barbetta and I can take a look at if emancipated minor as phrasing is within school code as well.
yeah, it'd be great to clarify that, because, and student is a better choice of word because it does imply that outside of school, they're not minors. I don't know if our student rep or teacher rep have any thoughts or comments? Okay, anyone else? All right, so we will expect to see this on our board agenda in October for a first read. thank you so much. And let's move into the next agenda item, 4.05, Policy 218, Student Discipline, which is for a first read. Dr. Hand.
Thank you. Now, the next three policies in this series, we tried to keep these together. These all come from changes in Act 33, so that's what brings these policies before the committee this evening. So Policy 218 on student discipline, again, based on Act 33, we wanted to take a look at that and see if any changes were needed. So Act 33 was changes to school code that dealt with safety and security. So we did some reorganization in here. We did add the definition for an incident in there, which came from PSBA recommended languages, and also added the references to referrals to law enforcement in the procedures for that, and then included some new citations. So not many major changes, but there were a few.
Is there any comments from the committee? I have one proposed change. We actually discussed this in leadership, so it's not a surprise to Dr. Hand. But on the bottom of page 4, where we are, the superintendent and administrative team shall designate sanctions for the infractions of rules and regulations developed for each educational level, which shall, skip down to number 4, hold parents and guardians accountable for the actions of their sons or daughters or wards. And I am proposing that we say their child/children or wards, and acknowledge that we may have children who are not sons or daughters, but just say their child. If that's an okay proposal. I think within the committee, we can make that recommended change, and it can be on the agenda as the first read, correct?
We can make that change for the
Great.
first read.
All right, so, yes, Ms. Peterson.
That also goes to one of the policies that we did last month about changing the language. So I feel like that should be made because,
The
yeah.
committee just recommended making
Yeah.
that change. Yep, so we're good. Thank you, we're aligned on that. Great. Beyond that, I think we'll expect to see this policy on the agenda in October for a first read with that change. Great, thank you. Moving on to our next policy, which is item 4.06, Policy 218.1, Weapons. This is up for a first read. Dr. Hand?
Okay. And again, we had just taken a look at weapons in 2023. So again, coming up because of Act 33. So that's what brings this back to us yet again. If you're recalling the original 2023 discussions, you might recall a lot of discussion on why nunchucks are in there. So if that rings a bell, that is because we did just discuss this recently. So in this one, again, according to Act 33, we wanted to take a look at it. We reorganized some sections under authority, added a delegation of responsibility section, and did include some recommendations in there from PSBA in the guidelines section, again, in reference to law enforcement notification. So you're seeing a common thread. We saw that in the last one as well. And again, updated the citations.
Do we have any comments or feedback? I have one comment about this policy. On page 2, under delegation of responsibility, when the memorandum of understanding policy is passed in October as a second read and adoption, I would imagine that we will see a cross-referencing to that board policy under this delegation, because it will, in fact, not only be a district memorandum of understanding, it will actually be a policy.
And in fact, the memorandum of understanding will be approved, and we can actually include that in the second read.
Right, that's my point. Yep, thank you so much. Is there any other comments? All right, we can expect to see this on the October agenda for a first read, and we will now move into our final agenda item of policy, which is item 4.07, Policy 218.2, Terroristic Acts and Threats, for a first read. Dr. Hand.
Again, coming out of Act 33 of 2023 forced us to take a look at this. So again, reorganizing based on Radnor policy for policy structure and language. We did add a reference in there to the district's emergency preparedness plan, and that's under delegation of responsibility, updated some citations, and there were a few other adjustments to the administrative regulation, specifically in reference to us conducting threat assessments, which is something that we already do, but that was an update inside of the administrative regulation.
Do we have any comments or feedback on this policy from, okay, Ms. Peterson? I would say the same comment for this policy, Dr. Hand. There is a reference in here to the memorandum of understanding. It's under guidelines on page 2 of 3. So when that policy is passed, we would expect a cross-reference to that policy on the MOU. And in fact, I would suggest that you maybe capitalize memorandum of understanding.
I already wrote that down.
You know me so well. All righty. Is there any other feedback on this one? Great. So we can expect to see this policy on our agenda in October for a first read. And now we can move into new business. Is there any new business this evening? Righty. The only thing I'd like to mention, just following up on the public comment, because it was a little bit unusual to have a back and forth, but we don't get a lot of public comment, and it's understandable that members of the public don't necessarily understand the function of public comment in how the interaction may or may not work, and I would never want anybody to be left feeling unheard or unwelcome by a no response, particularly when it's been a while since we've had any public comment. So I just wanted to share that with the committee, that is the reason I engaged, a little bit, but I do want to redirect back to the administration, which is typically how something, when there's a concern being raised, whether it's about a policy or a student or a procedure, it would be most appropriate for us to refer them back to the administration. And there is a procedure within our policies, Dr. Hand, I trust you'll share this with him, that if he is not satisfied with the responses he's getting, there is a board policy that outlines his opportunities to raise his level of concern kind of up the chain, and theoretically, something could actually reach the board just simply by following established board policy on that. So I wanted to kind of put that out there to anybody who's listening or would like to understand follow-up. I don't have anything else. I don't know if anybody else does. All right, great. Do we have any further public comment? We don't. Okay, great. So then we are adjourned, and I will see you in November. I wish I knew the date, but I don't. It will be. We don't have oh, that's right, we don't have a policy meeting in November. We will, probably don't have one in December. We might not see each other until the new year. We might not. All right. Well, thank you all very much for your work. Good night. Adjourned.